Good afternoon, colleagues. We're in session, and we'll begin with our last committee meeting of the day, the Business Operations Committee. And I'll turn to the chair of that committee, Vice Chairman Duncan. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Davis. On behalf of Todd Chastain and myself, we lead the Business Operations Committee and have several items to report today. Our first item is one of new business. As everyone knows, we've had a number of COVID funding distributions to make over the course of the past several months, and we asked Alexa Schaus to put together a chart that shows the information that shows board members all the things that have been allocated, where they came from, what the timing is on the various funds in terms of time to be able to spend them, and what some of the expenditures off the funds look like. That is some tally of where funds have been spent, and some of these, have been contributed so recently that it's not been spent yet. In any event, a full update as we continue to monitor responsibly the various funding that's been provided. So with that, let me turn it over to Ms. Schaus for a review of this information she's put together. And I want to thank her in advance for all the work.
Thank you, sir. This is Alexa Schaus. So this presentation provides a synopsis of the actions taken since March related to COVID funding and the status of those funds as of September 30th. The last 7 months, there have been numerous emergency actions to appropriate and distribute funding to public schools, starting at the federal level and moving to the North Carolina General Assembly, the Governor's Office, the State Board of Education, DPI, and public school governing boards. We've all been working furiously to provide support to those school districts, not only during the initial shutdown and remote learning, but now guiding them through the paused openings. Through the Business and Operations Committee, the State Board has approved 24 allotment policies and a state-level reserve budget. And the gaggle policy today that you have on the BizOp agenda marks the final policy of these COVID funds. And of course, these funds have not been the work of one person, but in collaboration with DPI program staff, federal programs, digital teaching learning, exceptional children, school nutrition, the Governor's Office, State Board of Education staff, and local superintendents. So today I was asked to provide an overview on the financial side of this historic period of time and the status of where we are today. You have in your materials 3 attachments. They are living documents that were first posted on the FBS website in May when House Bill 1043 was passed. They were developed as a reference tool and communication for the public schools, DPI, and other education stakeholders. The first is the COVID Allotment Policy Manual, And this is a compilation of those 24 allotment policies that the State Board has approved. The schedule of the COVID funds provides a snapshot of the COVID funds formula, legislative references, and the status of those policy approvals and allocations. And we update those as we go through the process so the public schools know where we are. And then finally, the summary of the allocation by public school unit. This is kind of a one-stop shop document that provides a schedule of all the allocation amounts by COVID fund by public school unit. And we update this as soon as we have done the calculations. Sometimes after there has been an approval of a policy, there is a lag time of about a week or two before we can process them formally through the system. So this schedule provides the LEAs a heads up as soon as we have those funds available. In addition, some of the funds, as we'll talk about, require an application. And so this also provides them a heads up on that. So the first half of the presentation will provide an overview of the $837.5 million that's been appropriated to the 330 public school units and 26 nonprofits. And then the second half will kind of slice it a different way in looking at the funding by purpose. For instance, looking how much has been appropriated for EC grants or school nutrition, regardless of the funding source. These funds have gone out incrementally over time, and it's kind of created a lot of confusion and losing place as to where we are with regards to these kind of groupings. So taking a big picture approach of the CARES Act and the state COVID funds, I developed this diagram here kind of a while ago to try and assist people keeping track of all the different buckets of funding sources. So starting on the left-hand side, in March, Governor Cooper provided $50 million in state resources to public school units, as well as provided flexibility on the use of other state funds. You may recall that school districts were permitted to use yellow bus transportation funds to be used to deliver meals during the closed down period. And he also permitted flexibility on the textbook funds to be used to purchase devices. The second block down there was from House Bill 1023, which permitted DPI to use state transportation allotment up to $12 million for grants for summer nutrition transportation. And then another $3.9 million was appropriated to subsidize the student costs for reduced price lunch. The Coronavirus Relief Fund, or the CRF, is where the state and the we're still on that diagram, thank you. Gets where the state and the federal funds get blurry. So I'm going to move over to the right-hand side and start with the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which we refer to as the CARES Act. The CARES Act is, in fact, a 330 or odd pages document providing financial relief to many sectors of the economy, as well as providing funds for education. So of the $30 billion appropriated for education stabilization, $13 billion was appropriated for K-12 schools, and North Carolina's portion of those funds are in ESSEF and GEAR. So the North Carolina share of the Elementary and Secondary School, or K-12, Emergency Relief Fund, which we refer to as ESSEF, are $396 million. And just under $357 million of that was allocated out to public school units. And the remaining 10% was reserved for state-level initiatives and administration. North Carolina's share of the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund or GEAR, is $96.6 million, of which Governor Cooper allocated $60 million to K-12 schools. The remaining of those funds went to community colleges and universities. And then the final CARES Act piece is that went to public schools was the Title V Coronavirus Relief Funds, or CRF. And these funds came from the federal government and were appropriated for specific purposes through the North Carolina General Assembly. And the total appropriated by the General Assembly for K-12 is $316 million, and were appropriated in 4 different session laws from May 4th to September 4th. These funds are slightly different in the fact that they look like state funds, but they do have some federal restrictions on their use. So taking a little different look at the funds as a whole, this pie graph will shows the different pieces of the COVID funds, and then the orange items are the funds that have either already expired or will expire December 30th of this year. And then the blue items are those that expire in September 2022. And you can also see that there is less than 1% of these funds were reserved for state level and administration. Public schools, when we're talking about public schools, the numbers are large, and the numbers are large here. And so I want to kind of put it in perspective a little bit. So the total K-12 state fund budget is $10.4 billion. So these funds in totality represent about 8% of what that total is. So looking at each piece of this and providing a snapshot, starting with the state funds, you can see on this, we have the Governor Cooper's emergency funds that have expired, and then also the summer grants have also expired. The reduced price lunch piece will extend through the end of this fiscal year. It's important to note the reduced price lunch was in fact funded with non-recurring funds, and so those funds will not continue unless there is additional funding provided for them into 21-22. For the federal, now we got ESSF. So the federal government determined the allocation method of these funds, and each eligible public school unit received the same proportion of total funds as they received in the 2019-20 Title I Part A. So kind of providing reference on these funds, Title I funds for North Carolina public schools are in the range of about $430 million. So in effect, the public schools received an additional allocation of approximately 82% of their Title I funds. These funds are significant in the fact that they can be used for almost any purpose that the public schools need. I think we're all familiar with the 10% state reserve that is made up of 9.5% for state emergency needs and 0.5% for administration. And these are the funds that came from ESSF, and the State Board of Education with the state superintendent submitted to and received approval from the federal government on the use of these funds. It did include $31 million. The budget that was submitted included $31 million in additional allocations to public school units, and then the $6.6 million in state initiatives, which the majority of that, about $4.5 million, is set for staffing for regional and statewide system of support. Gear, these are 2 items, as I mentioned, that the governor determined the use of these funds, providing $60 million for the mental health support and $20 million for supplemental instructional services. And then finally, the $316 million for the CRF funds. These are the funds that expire December 30th. They are state funds with underlying federal restrictions, and the newly formed North Carolina Pandemic Relief Office is responsible for monitoring and reporting on these funds. The CRF restrictions that I've talked about, they are important to note and are included in all the allotment policies that have been approved by the state board. Next slide. In short, these restrictions state that the funds must be used for expenditures that are incurred due to or in response to COVID, and they may not be used for expenditures that were expected or budgeted prior to COVID. In addition, the funds may not be used for revenue shortfall, which has complicated the use for some CAs for school nutrition. So looking at a breakdown of all these buckets. These are the CRF funds that the General Assembly appropriated to public schools, which you have approved policies. And some of them had a distribution method that was explicit in the legislation, but some were left open to the state board's discretion. So the next segment provides the allocation by purpose. And many of these funds came down, as I stated, in kind of increments from March and September. So this is kind of combining them in groups. There is no science to these groups. It's really how I chose to group them for this presentation. But you'll see each one of these slides provides a description of the appropriation, the source of funding that we've just gone through, the total allocation or appropriation amount, how much has been expended as of September 30th, the remaining balance, and then the date that the funds were formally allocated, and then the expiration of these funds. You'll note that in the date allocated, I have a couple of footnotes for some of them. This is some of these funds, specifically the ESSERF and GEAR, they are full federal grants and require public school units to apply for the funds and submit a budget prior to being able to allocate out the funds. It's a process that the public schools are familiar with. They do this for Title I and IDEA. We are streamlining the process as much as we can for these particular funds and developing an application with the minimum requirements. But you can see from here about half of the funds are for this broad use category. The items here, you'll see some of the funding source saying CRF. Those allocations do not require an application unless they were approved as grants in that allotment policy. I think with most of these slides, they are fairly self-explanatory and they are provided for your reference. And I'm just going to highlight some specific items that I think would be of interest and certainly be able to respond to any questions. But related to the summer learning, which was the jumpstart during the summer, you'll see that there is unexpended item dollars in that. And some of those funds, per the state legislation, does permit them to be used for support, instruction, and tutoring after the beginning of the instructional year. So we do anticipate additional expenditures out of those funds. The next grouping is for EC for a total of $47 million in grant funding. It recognizes the extraordinary costs associated with providing future services and instructional support for exceptional children. And it does say that under the $37 million that they have been allocated. At this point, $15 million, which was the first installment of those grants, has been allocated, and the remaining is pending the grant awards. This is the group for the mental health support for a combined total of $50 million for both contracted, which the $10 million is restricted to contracted positions, and then the $40 million can be used for contracted or positions. This is the largest group with a number of items. It is the collection of allocations associated with remote learning, including devices, mobile Wi-Fi, and cybersecurity. And you'll see that some of these expenditures may seem low at this time, which is due in part to backlogs resulting in delays of deliveries. Public school units have encumbered or committed significantly more than what you see here, and we hope that the backlogs are going to resolve itself before the end of the year. As a result of the delays, the public schools have expressed concern that they will not have received the items prior to December 30th deadline and risk losing the funds. But the U.S. Treasury recently provided a modification to their initial guidance, permitting the public schools to use the funds after December 30th if they meet the condition that they have entered into a contract requiring the delivery of the item by December 30th and the failure of the delivery is due to circumstances beyond their control. So that has provided some relief on the public schools, because that was a very significant concern, specifically related to those devices. This is the group related to the learning management system, Canvas, and digital curricula, which is a policy that was just approved last week. And you'll see there that there are two items for the learning management system. The 1.4 million is from coronavirus, the CRF funds, and is for new and expanding licenses. I mentioned that those funds cannot be used to replace budgeted items. So part of the state reserve was to provide $3.5 million for the cost of existing licenses, so that both all school districts will benefit from those funds. The Ellis and the iCares grant is a combined total of $9.5 million for after school. The Ellis do go to the nonprofits, the 26 nonprofits, and the iCares for public school units. The $27 million for PPE is a standalone item. I couldn't figure out where to group it. So you may recall that this policy was approved last week, and we're currently collecting the phase data from all public school units to calculate the allocation in accordance with the policy. Public school units, I do want to keep this in mind, that they are permitted to go back and reimburse themselves for expenditures that they've made prior to the time of allocation. So they can go back and use these funds for expenditures that were incurred back in July. One of the largest buckets is the school nutrition, for close to $81 million that was provided to support the school nutrition services. The reason you'll note that on the reduced price lunch, which I had stated earlier was an appropriation from House Bill 1023, there is a very small amount expended. And this low expenditure is due to the fact that there was the USDA extended the waivers for December 31st, through December 31st of this year. So the reimbursement rate is taken care of through that program. We do anticipate those, assuming there will not be an additional extension, that those funds will be used in the second half of this fiscal year. The residential school is included here, but technically school business, we don't allot funds out to the residential schools. This budget is part of the DPI agency budget, so there is no allocation there. They have received, that we do have the budget at DPI. And then the other two items were part of those policies from last week that were for direct appropriations to specific school districts and community and schools. And finally, in order that we have a full total population of all the funds, I've added the $7.5 million. These are funds that are not allocated to the public schools, and they are administered through the department, and provided you an update of these items at the last state board meeting. Those are all the funds. You can see here that kind of the distribution of the funds. The blue is those broad use funds, the ESSERF and the $50 million from Governor Cooper's emergency action, and then kind of seeing the other larger items being supplemental instruction. Most of that is the Jumpstart money, and school nutrition, being that there was 75 million for school nutrition. So I hope that seeing the two different slices of this, and having these reference materials will help everyone kind of keep track of where we are with this. We do update our Financial and Business Services website on a regular basis for the allocations, as well as any changes to the policies for the public.
Thank you. That's an excellent presentation. It helps in a very digestible form set out where we are in terms of these various allocations and probably raises a question or two for members. And so let me ask if there are any questions or comments that you have that haven't had a chance to review. Yes, Chair Davis.
Dr. Duncan, one question that the public may have is for those categories that indicate there are funds that are not yet expended, but we're past the expiration date. What's the status of those funds?
Referring to the $50 million that has been expired, those funds revert back to the state at June 30th. And the only other funds I believe that have expired was the General Assembly permitted DPI to use up to $12 million of the transportation for summer grants for school nutrition. Only $2.2 million was requested and approved for that. And at this point, we do not have, we will be calculating the final numbers on that with our school transportation allocation.
Alexis, to be clear, that amount does not revert. That was an amount that was being specially set out. We could use for different purposes than normal as needed. The extent not needed goes back into the regular transportation fund. Is that right?
Correct. Anything that was not used will be part of the transportation allocation to the public schools.
All right. So the other question maybe that gets raised by Chair Davis's question is a couple items in particular that run out in terms of expenditure deadline for December 30th, 2020. The two that probably jump out the most have to do with the meal programming and the Jumpstart programming that still allows for tutoring and additional services through the fall semester. Are our leaders in that area of the state reaching out to perhaps hold webinars for districts that are not necessarily using all of that funding to assist them to put those monies to good use and purpose by way of providing suggestions and options for how those monies can be usefully spent to better serve our children?
So related to the school nutrition, there has been a regular webinars on that item. As I said, the school nutrition 75 million is funded out of CRF funds, and it does have federal restrictions. For some school districts, it creates an inability to use those funds. And so the school nutrition area, along with NC Pro, has been providing a lot of guidance as to what is permissible and what is not. So that is for some school districts, it really depends. Like some of the school districts have used all their funds, and some will have some difficulties based on those restrictions. Related to the Jumpstart, the summer program, that is a little bit harder to respond to. Again, there are some school districts had, a lot of students participate. If you recall, it was up to the parents as to whether the students participated. And the legislation is very restrictive as to how much you can carry over into the school year. So if they were not able to use the funds due to low enrollment or just because they had a very short period of time to get the program up and running, they are restricted as to how much they will be able to use for after the beginning of the school year. I can tell you that we have provided a lot of guidance related to how to they can revisit their budgets to maximize how much they can carry over after the first instructional day. But it is restrictive in nature as to how much they can use after the beginning of the school year.
Thank you for that report. A lot of this is in fact pretty complicated in terms of what qualifies or not. And I know that's particularly true or has been in the school nutrition area. So everything we can do to help support the districts and help them maximize the use of funding when I know the impact is heavy on districts to make sure children have been fed. All that we can do to support that, I know is going to be greatly appreciated. Any questions, further questions or comments on this report?
Mr. Duncan,
Yes, please.
this is Ms. Kamnitz. I just want to say thank you to you and Ms. Schaus for this item, because I was just recently thinking to myself, we really need to see a broad overview of this money that seemed like it was coming thick and fast there for a while. So this is very helpful. Thank you so much.
Well, the thanks go to Ms. Schaus. We appreciate it very much, and also to Dr. Townsend Smith, who has also felt like this was an important priority for the board of DMC. So we thank them for their work. All right, our first item then on action, we have several items, 5 in all, on action on first reading. The first one is approval of contracts over $500,000. I have not received any questions or comments from any board members to this point, or I would raise them now. Not having had any, however, if someone has a question, please speak up or ask now. Ms. Tamika Dunn is available to respond to any questions. All right, not hearing any. We will go on then to Biz Op 2, which is relates to COVID-19 Session Law 2020-97, known as House Bill 1105. Requires an allotment for policy and the plan for distributing the funds to comply with that session law. I think we have Michael Nicolaides and Vanessa Wren available to present to the board the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. This item is straightforward. Session Law 1105 directed the Department of Public Instruction to allocate up to $1 million to public school units for gaggle products. So we worked with the vendor and came up with pricing and set up a allotment policy, which will be by application.
Right. Thank you. That policy is set out in your materials in greater detail and sets out what the funding is for and how it's to be used. These were special allocations, if you will, to assist specific districts. Any questions or comments with respect to this allotment? Which is, we're nearing the end on allotments, but if you got any questions on this one, please ask them now. All right, not hearing any, we'll go on to Biz Op 3, which is, I'm sorry. Does somebody want to say something? All right, let me move on then to Biz Op 3, approval of digital learning initiative grant for public school units. And we have a grant evaluation team proposal to review applications in order to distribute funding to school districts and charter schools. And I believe Vanessa Wren, Lindsay Sykes, and Julie Garganas will be assisting us with describing this grant program and making recommendations.
Thank you, sir. This is Vanessa Wren. The North Carolina Digital Learning Plan recommends provisioning grants to public school units to support local innovation of digital learning. All PSUs are eligible to apply. And I can tell you, as a former recipient of these grants, it's had a significant impact on students' engagement and digital ability. We did recommend to the board, and you approved, that we extended the deadline this year. The original deadline to apply was April the 27th, and we extended that to August the 31st because of the current educational landscape, but we did still see the number of applications lower than in years past. We do plan to open up a second round as a result and offer another opportunity for these grants in the upcoming year. I will now turn it over to Julie Gerganis, who is the Northeast Digital Teaching and Learning Regional Consultant, and Lindsay Sipe, who is the Southwest Digital Teaching and Learning Regional Consultant, to review the recommendations for these grant recipients.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Johnson, Chairperson Davis, and Vice Chairperson Duncan, and members of the State Board. My name is Lindsay Sipe, and I'm from the Digital Teaching and Learning Division. Julie Gerganis and I are the co-managers of the DLI grants, and today we are pleased to present a list of public school units that we are recommending to receive Digital Age Learning Initiative grant funding. You will see for this year, we received a total of 29 applications from across the state. If you recall, for the 2020-2021 school year, there are two types of grant programs. Planning grants, which are intended to support public school units developing new digital teaching and learning initiatives. We received 16 of those applications for the planning grant. The implementation grants are intended to provide resources, public school units, to put their actions into plans for digital teaching and learning with funds over a 2-year period. We received 13 applications for the implementation grant. We believe that these recommendations for public school units represent the diversity of the applicant pool and were identified by the teams of evaluators in alignment with the state board policy for competitive grants. You'll find that there are urban and rural public school units, Tier 1 counties, charter schools, and as well as a lab school that are being recommended. If we look at the next slide, you will see, based on available funding, that we are recommending 6 of the 16 PSUs be funded for the planning grant. The breakdown of applicants that we will recommend for a planning grant include 4 traditional school districts, 1 charter school, and 1 lab school. It is also important to note that 2 of these public school units are Tier 1 as well. On the next slide, you can see that we have provided a visual breakdown for you of the recommended public school units for the planning grant. A map as well as these recommendations are shown on as attachment 4 as well, if that's helpful for you. And I will now pass it over to my DLI co-manager, Julie Gerganis, who will review the implementation grant recommendations for you.
Everyone in our community.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Based upon available funding, we are recommending that 6 of 13 public school unit applications be funded with an implementation. Breakdown of applicants that we are for these grants includes. Yes, ma'am.
Own 2 buses.
There are 2. You have 2 systems running, and we're getting feedback from your system.
And implementing our transportation.
I apologize.
We are purchasing the buses now.
Can you hear me now? Is it doing it now?
All of the things
It's still doing it. Yes, ma'am.
It is really, really hard to achieve as a
I
charter
apologize.
school.
On available funding, we're recommending that 6 of the 13 public school unit applicants
Community
be funded.
Wow. So, and then third step for us.
Sorry about that. We are recommended that 6 of the 13 public school unit applicants be funded for the implementation grant. The breakdown of applicants that we are recommending for the implementation grant includes 5 traditional schools and 1 charter school. Moving to the next slide, you'll see that we have provided a visual breakdown of the recommendations for the implementation grants. A map of these recommendations is also available on as attachment 4, if that's helpful for you. Based upon your approval for both planning and implementation grants, each PSU will receive a notification letter with comments from the evaluation team specific to their application. For the grantees that we have scheduled For grantees, we've scheduled an informational and technical webinar in partnership with the Friday Institute. And based upon available funding, we plan to distribute allotments as quickly as possible. And we will take a moment to thank you so much for your support of the Digital Age Learning Initiative and the work that is occurring across North Carolina public school units. Thank you again.
All right, thank you for that report, which sets out the grant proposals and the basis of the grant work that all of you have put into this process. Are there questions or comments with respect to this recommendation and report? All right, with not hearing any, thank you again for the work that's going into this. We move on then to Biz Op 4, which is the JLEOC report, State Board of Education waivers of state laws or rules granted to local education agencies. This is an annual report with respect to waivers of state law or rules granted to local educational agencies. And we call upon Alexis Schaus again for a quick summary of the report, which is before you.
Thank you. Yes, this is Alexis Schaus. This is an annual report. It has it provides a report of the waivers that have been approved by the state board. The class size waivers are a delegated authority to the state superintendent, so you do not have those coming to you. He does approve those under your delegation. And then the other item is the calendar waiver waivers that, in fact, although these school districts requested waivers, with the change in the calendar law, none of them were utilized. Finally, we did kind of do a review to see if there were any waivers that the state board had approved for because of the COVID situation, and we did not find any. So this is a routine report that goes over to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee.
All right, thank you. Are there questions or comments on this report? It's an annual event. Thank you. Thank you again. Moving on then to Biz Op 5, which is report to the Joint Legislative Education Committee on the 5th grade career awareness program. Jacqueline White is here to report about this report to JLEOC.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Duncan, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Wyatt, and I'm the Career Readiness Specialist in the Career and Technical Education Division here at DPI. Per legislation, each local Board of Education is encouraged to implement a career awareness program for 5th grade students, which will both increase career awareness and awareness on the career and technical education programs offered in their PSU. A local Board of Education that adopts a career awareness program must report on program activities and student outcomes to the State Board, which will then be submitted to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee. With that, in previous years, the CTE division has developed and implemented a survey tool to all PSUs to collect data on common practices for introducing 5th grade students to CTE, which include but are not limited to middle school and high school tours, field trips and business tours, job shadowing opportunities, guest speakers, and other career events. Though participation is not required, we are pleased that we had a 97% response rate for the 2019-2020 school year. We're also pleased that results of the 5th grade career awareness survey indicated that approximately 50,841 5th grade students were exposed to career awareness related activities and CTE programs offered in their PSUs. However, we do believe that those numbers were severely impacted during the 2020 spring semester due to COVID-19, as many districts reported that plans to engage students in career and CTE activities were canceled or postponed until students were permitted to safely reassemble. So that is the 2019-2020 report in a nutshell, but I also wanted to quickly speak to you all about our plans moving forward. So I have an excellent colleague, Anna Hare. She is the regional coordinator for the Western counties, and I cannot speak highly enough of her. She and I have listened to the comments and concerns from the field. We worked with CTE regional coordinators, CTE directors, and other CTE staff to overhaul the old survey, or the one previously used, I guess I should say, in order to decrease the amount of time spent taking the survey, decrease the amount of survey questions, and better collect data that we believe would be more representative of fifth grade programs in North Carolina. Lastly, we will be rolling out our new survey next week at our virtual fall CTE conference, and providing survey takers with tools that will help them in collecting local data throughout the year, which we believe will further decrease difficulty in survey completion.
Jacqueline, thank you for that report. In fact, you and your colleague really have done some great proactive work. The survey was, I believe, 90 questions long before, and it was creating real difficulties in getting returns because of the way it was put together. And now we have a 30-question survey that should result in even getting more productive and helpful information and be a little more friendly to the users who are very overworked districts right now. Thank you for the thought and consideration that's gone into that effort, and start to see the results of that next year. Are there any questions about the report for submission this year? And any questions about the change that's being proposed will be put in place for next year to make this a more user-friendly survey?
Vice Chair Duncan, this is Amy White.
Yes.
I apologize if I missed this. Can you, could you better explain the end user for the survey? Who is it that's actually taking the survey? And after I receive that answer, I'd like to have a follow-up.
Sure, Ms. White.
Absolutely. Typically, our CTE directors take the survey. We do have some career development coordinators and school counselors who take the survey. Oh, and
Okay.
to your first question, my apologies. To your first question, we use a Microsoft Forms.
Okay, thank you for that. Non-related to that, but a follow-up is related to our conversation and our presentation yesterday from My Future NC and educating early and often about student options for career planning. It seems to me that there should be coordinated efforts if we are touching students in fifth grade to help expose them to career and college readiness and CTE courses, that this would be an opportunity to introduce the language regarding FAFSA and getting FAFSA information into the hands of those fifth graders and those parents so we can begin the education process about what it takes in order to prepare for post-secondary education. That's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. Any other questions or comments by board members? All right. Well, thank you, Ms. White. Please thank your colleagues for the work gone into moving forward with this reporting form in a more efficient manner. That now brings us to a consent item, Biz Op 6. We have one certification of the finance officer recommended to us for Northampton County. We have two now, sorry. We have two recommended finance officers. Unless there's any questions, that's as we all know, a routine consent item for our committee. Then we have an update on contracts. We've got both an executed contracts report and a planned contract report. Not been contacted by any of our members who have questions on any of these, but when you open the floor in case there are questions, comments, so that we can make sure you have all the information on it. All right, not hearing anything, let's then go on to our requested updates. We got our agency vacancy report, our monthly report. I know Ron Paxton is available for any questions. Let me ask you, Ron, any comments that you would like to make with respect to the vacancy recruiting report? And then certainly ask for any members who have any questions. Certainly want to report
Really, not a whole lot of commentary. It's pretty straightforward information. Can slide if you want to just roll through the slides, and if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
All right, we will do that. And any member, please let us know so we can have your questions answered. All right, not hearing any. Thank you, Mr. Paxson.
You're welcome.
We'll go on then to the monthly budget report, and have not gotten any questions on this. We have talked about needing to go through this in some more detail and have some more detailed discussion about this. And we, of course, start the budget process next month in November, as McKinney set out for us during his legislative report earlier today. So I think a couple things that would be helpful to talk about the monthly budget report at our next meeting, to make sure we're getting the information we need. It's also undergoing some revision, as we all will recall when we passed the budget amendment. There were some things that the staff was still working on to bring into compliance with the board rule as we move forward that was not technologically ready to be implemented. That process is ongoing, and we can get an update on things are affected that, as well as would ask Catherine Johnson to be available to give us a review of where we are with respect to this budget, and then also part of the discussion along with others from the department in terms of how we start to look at the budget in the coming year. I would ask you to study this document between now and our next meeting, because we will spend a good bit of time with respect to budget matters next time. And I think it will be helpful if we take a look and get better familiarization with this document. That will include, if you've got suggestions or information consistent with our rules without any further modifications, so we can have that discussion as well. Unless there's further questions today, that would end our committee's report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and my appreciation to all staff members who contributed to that good work in our business operations area. We have a couple of items of new business to report the board on. You'll recall that in August, we shared the vision of a new partnership with our districts and charter schools called the North Carolina Education Board, and then provided an update in our September meeting. I'm pleased today to invite to speak with us and provide a further update on this exciting initiative, former State Superintendent Dr. Mike Ward, who's playing a leading role in the development of this effort, along with Mr. John Paul Smith of the nonprofit American Ripples, who is serving as a co-program director through the Governor's Office for Volunteerism and Community Service. This time I'll turn to Dr. Ward. So we'll come back to Dr. Ward and Mr. Smith in just a moment. Another new business item concerns a matter that's great by the board and interest concerning the establishment of an equity office. We're delighted that over the last few weeks, I've had the pleasure of having multiple communications with the superintendent, who made some excellent suggestions and agreements to move this interest forward. Most notably was the idea of establishing an equity office under the leadership of Dr. Davis, making him a dual report to the board and the superintendent and establishing his role as deputy superintendent for equity and innovation. I think this is an excellent idea that the superintendent has brought to us. It allows us to tap into the experience Dr. Stegall brings to this area, and also the leadership of being able to integrate equity throughout the agency, beginning with the members of this team. It seems that at this point, the next appropriate step for us is to further define what an equity office looks like, what are the responsibilities, what are the roles, what are the expectations. This is an area of great interest to every board member. And so while I will assign the responsibility for putting together a proposal for the equity office to the strategic planning committee in consultation with Dr. Stegall, I'd ask every board member to provide their input into the strategic planning committee for what you would like the equity office to do, what you'd like for it not to do. Feel free to send any written correspondence through Dr. Townsend Smith to facilitate the development of those documents, but I do encourage direct interaction and engagement between board members, because that's how we most benefit from each other's life experiences and points of view on this matter. So before opening that item to comment, I'd like to turn to our superintendent for any further comment. Superintendent Johnson.
Thanks, Chair Davis. I think this is a great step forward in partnership. It has been an honor and privilege to bring in such strong leaders like Catherine Johnston and David Segal and Beverly Emery, and moving Beverly over to be the executive director for Leander implementation gave me this idea to put David in this role of ensuring equity, since so much of the department falls under his leadership. And I can think of no better person, because you heard the proof in the pudding from the amazing work that is going on in the district he used to lead. So he has a heart for this, and I'm excited to go forward with this with the state board.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. And just to clarify that this work that we're launching today will set the stage for, after the board's approval, for selecting the equity officer and whatever additional staff necessary in consultation with that superintendent. So I'll open the floor for any comments or questions on this item.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Ford.
I think it goes without saying that I 100% support this move and this action, and personally very fond of and appreciate Dr. Stegall, his track record of work and his lens as it pertains to equity. So, but as you mentioned, I just want to get some clarification. So as it stands, we're creating this umbrella of work and moving under the leadership of Dr. Stegall, with the expectation that an equity office will be created, the terms of which will be negotiated by the Strategic Planning Committee, and later the leader of that office will be, searched for and appointed at a later time. Is that correct? Is my assumption accurate?
Yes, I would only slightly modify your statement to say that the Strategic Planning Committee will develop the framework, defining roles and responsibilities, and sort of defining the work of the equity office to bring back to the full board for the full board's consideration and approval. And then one of the following steps after approval would be to work in consultation with the superintendent on selection of equity officer who would report to Dr. Stegall.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And again, my excitement. I think it's a tremendous move for the state of North Carolina, but most particularly the vision and the mission that we've adopted and want to serve writ large. And so, thank you for that.
Any other questions, comments?
Chair Davis, this is Ms. Kamnitz.
Ms. Kamnitz.
I share Mr. Ford's excitement at this forward, at this this big step that we're taking. And I think that after all of us listening to Ms. McMillan yesterday about the power of a leader in this position to make change, and it's just so exciting that we're starting to move towards having an in-house equity officer. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Ms. Candace. And yeah, personally, from the presentation we received yesterday from Winston-Salem Forsyth, I think they offer an example worth emulating. They're very well done. We have much to learn from them and other districts who are doing this. Mr. Keenan. Mr. Hall, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that in doing this, it's certainly, in creating this position, it certainly says to others that we're serious about this word equity, and we're moving forward and placing it as a high priority with us. I just commend the state board and others in going forward with this position. It will certainly benefit us in the future. Thank you.
Here, Keenan.
What other board members have said, we're excited about the ups and downs, talking about coming around the curve and getting better. And I think that is a great step. It's turning to get things better. And I'm very honored to be part of a board that has this kind of vision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You. Any other comments? Okay, well, thank you. And on a similar note, as the superintendent mentioned, another person who will play a critical role in not only this area of making equity part of what we do every day, but also integrating that into our budget and operations in support of our students, districts, and schools. Ms. Catherine Johnston, and the superintendent has suggested that she also become a dual report to the board and the superintendent, and I think that's a noteworthy suggestion that we would like to accept. And I just offer again my thanks to the superintendent for both of these, as well as Dr. Emery's role around the Andrew as indications of increased partnership and work towards our students. So my thanks to you, superintendent, on that. And then before we return to our education core item is, we're getting some feedback. We'll try again. One other item that's coming to us in the not too distant future concerns our K-3 literacy diagnostic tool, and we know we've got a number of staff members working hard on that particular selection. I think what I understand, and I'll turn to Duncan or Ms. Candace from this up in SLA in a moment, but that if the board has interest in considering the merits of single vendor versus multi-vendor opportunities on that particular one, we would like the opportunity to learn more about the pros and cons of those two, and so we ask that be integrated into the work that's underway. So we turn to Vice Chair Duncan for further comment.
Thank you. Although we had some technical difficulties, we ultimately were able to get some feedback. We would suggest board members are very interested in getting a better understanding of whether one statewide contract or more than one district choice would be the better approach to go. And there's some research that we want to get done. We did touch base with Davis who got ownership of this effort, and he seemed to also think that there's some research he would want to check into as well. So with the board's guidance and certainly, the department's guidance, certainly the board's interest in review, we would like to hit pause on this for long enough that we can get a better review and consensus on how to go, so that we can go forward. A bidding process is designed the way ultimately consensus. See whether the best recommendation is to have one statewide contract, or the best recommendation is to have multiple contracts to the vendors to present the proposals that are acceptable to the procurement process. So that's the way that we intend to proceed. We would be probably looking to get the information to the DIP sometime in November or December, once we have settled upon the approach that we proceed. And also, you will recall we had issued to make sure when we had multiple vendors this summer that SAS coordinate for comparability purposes for ELOS. So we certainly going to want to do some research with SAS and the department. We want to do that as we take a look at what would make sense. As we undertake to do our homework here, then process moving with the same general anticipated end date. And certainly before the summer when the training will be paid for.
Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Okay, thank you. We'll return now to the motion on the education core opportunity, and I understand Dr. Ward and Mr. Smith are available. Welcome, Dr. Ward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Thanks so much for this opportunity to be in service to the board. I want to thank Governor Cooper for his support of Education Corps. Jeff Coltrane and Caroline Farmer in his office are providing great leadership, some useful contacts, and terrific insight as we're working to launch Education Corps. Good afternoon, board members. I'm really honored to be asked to play a role in the launch of the North Carolina Education Corps. As was the case with FAST-NC, I'm a volunteer, so like before, you won't have to worry about whether or not you're getting your money's worth. I want to ask you to imagine three scenarios. First, imagine you're a superintendent. You've deployed hotspots in the district to expand access for your students, but you don't have the number of people you need to reach out to households to make sure that these resources are working optimally and to make sure that troubleshooting can occur when problems crop up. Now imagine that you're a person fresh out of a 4-year program in computer science. That job that you were hoping for isn't going to come through. And besides, you've got a desire to do something in service to the community in a time of crisis. Finally, imagine a program that connects these two individuals. Think of a blend of Teach for America, the Harlem Children's Zone, Peace Corps, a partnership between the state and public school units, capable, competent, caring individuals trained for service to students, to schools, and to communities. These folks deployed around North Carolina using their skills to serve as tutors, to help students and families navigate the digital environment, to assist teachers, to help district leaders track COVID cases, to serve as linchpins between students and social emotional trauma response resources that they need, to mentor high school students who've stopped logging in or showing up only sporadically. I've been in a bunch of conversations with superintendents these past few weeks, and that list that I just shared is a mere sample of what they say they need. One this morning said that this might not only serve to provide support to her teachers, but it could also be an opportunity to put Corps members to work with students with the idea of getting these Corps members interested in becoming educators themselves. So who might serve in the Education Corps? These are just some examples. 2-year program completers from a community college, 4-year baccalaureate completers in education or another discipline, a college senior who could work half-time in the Education Corps, retirees, military spouses, veterans. So that's the big idea. I want to turn it over now to John Paul Smith to provide some details about how the Education Corps will work. John Paul is a product of North Carolina Public Schools. He comes from a family of public school educators. Over the last 5 years, he's worked with the Aspen Institute's Service Year Alliance, the Institute for Emerging Issues, the Office of the Governor to enhance and expand national civilian service opportunities for young Americans, especially young North Carolinians. John Paul is the co-founder with Richard Harrell of American Ripples. That's an organization that helps communities recruit, train, and deploy young people to work on public service projects. And we're really excited that he has agreed to work exclusively for the North Carolina Education Corps as the program director for the foreseeable future. So John Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how it all works.
Thank you, Mike. Mike is an unpaid volunteer because we can't figure out how to put a price on his contribution to the community woodpile. He's really a model of the example of the type of leadership we need right now. It was a Washington journalist who said that Americans are good at responding to wolves at the door. Issues like events like terrorist attacks and natural disasters. We're not as good as responding to termites in the basement, social distrust, racial inequity, those types of issues. And North Carolina Education Corps, in my mind, is really a great response to both the wolf that we're facing in COVID-19, as well as some of the termite issues we're facing as well. So the way that North Carolina Education Corps is gonna work in phase one is that we are focused on recruitment, training, and the deployment of Ed Corps members to tier 1 and tier 2 communities first. Want to get boots on the ground. Ed Corps members either working virtually or in person in school districts across the state by January. So the first phase of our work right now is really recruitment. There are two types of recruitment that we're doing. The first is with recruiting school districts. So Dr. Jack Hoke has been so kind to help convene a webinar with superintendents across the state. So we've had interest from several dozen districts across the state already, from Cherokee to Ashe County to Carteret to Cumberland. We are launching this afternoon the district application so that school districts can apply to become a part of the first phase and wave of Ed Corps members who will be on the ground in January. I can share that link so Deanna can send it out to others if you're interested this afternoon. We're also focused right now on building out a recruitment strategy for Ed Corps members. We will be recruiting Ed Corps members as soon as the applications from the school districts come in. The applications from the school districts are being used to really understand the specific needs of each individual school district, and then we'll map those needs to do targeted recruitment of Ed Corps members starting November 1. So the first phase of that, the first application deadline for school districts is October 16th. That's next Friday, 8 p.m. This is sort of an early action deadline for school districts. And then we'll have another deadline for round 2 of applications for school districts due November. Once we have those applications, we'll start recruitment for Corps members. And then we are also working on building out a training program right now that will have 2 aspects to it. One, there'll be standardized curriculum for all Ed Corps members, and then there'll be specialized curriculum for Ed Corps members based on the types of roles that Mike laid out: tutors, mental health aides, mentors, and so forth. I'll stop there. So that's operations. We're also pursuing fundraising from corporations and foundations to help with the financial piece of this. Freebird has been so kind to offer his services. He's already set up meetings with the North Carolina Network of Grant Makers, as well as the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce, that we'll have before the end of this month to help with some private fundraising. And that'll go in addition to the $125,000 that the governor's office has already provided to this effort. And I'm excited that we have a strong team right now. You're a part of the team. This is an all-hands effort, and look forward to your questions and ideas as we build this out.
Thank you, Dr. Ward, Mr. Smith. Questions from my colleagues?
Mr. Chair.
Is that Mr. Bristow Smith?
No, this is Tony Jackson.
Dr. Jackson. You have the floor.
I'll tell you. Good afternoon. Want to just say that and thank Mike and John Paul for the fast work and the clarity by which they've been able to bring this project to fruition, at least for district level superintendents to give it their best review and try to make sure that it can meet the needs in their communities. I would say that we see this as an opportunity to put hands on the ground and to really bring hearts and hands together to help kids when they return to school or however we continue to serve them in our communities. And so I'm excited about the opportunity and glad the application's coming out today. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for your support.
Other comment, Mr. Duncan.
I think of this as a real visionary task filled out from scratch when the need came on so quickly, and the need is so urgent and real. I'm particularly grateful, Mike Ward, as I have been to you innumerable times for willing to be such a great citizen of the state of North Carolina. And John Paul, it's very nice to meet you here virtually, and thank you for taking on this task. I think this work would lead to something really making a difference for students. What we're all about. Thank you for taking on this task.
Thank you for those kind words, Mr. Vice Chair. One of the great things about this concept is that it's been fleshed out by superintendents themselves. Dr. Jackson, just a moment ago, was one of the first people we consulted about how to put meat on the bones of the original framework. And superintendents have just had great ideas about whom we might recruit to serve as core members, and they've really expanded the notions of how they might be deployed in service, the kinds of tasks that they need assistance with. So as this unfolds, it will be a product of the creative thinking and terrific advice that we've gotten from across the community of school leaders in this state.
Mr. Chair, this is
Ms.
Ms.
Campbell.
I do have a question as regards to the fundraising. You talked about connecting with larger donors in the state, but is there a website or some way that smaller donations could be channeled into this work?
I can begin to answer that one. So that is a great idea, and we're working on that. We're having a website built now. Hopefully, we'll have it up by early November, and it's a great idea to maybe put a donation link on that website. We're working through the logistics of making fundraising easy from all corners.
Yeah, I couldn't find my unmute button there for a second, Ms. Kamnitz, but yeah, we'd like to go after foundation, corporation dollars, and individual donors as well. And as was the case with FAST NC, we'll have access to a couple of repositories. The North Carolina Education Fund is one under your purview that seems like a really logical primary repository.
Keep us aware.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one additional comment I'd make to the fundraising question is the North Carolina Education Corps is the junction for where those who have a heart for public education and our children's future intersect with those who have a desire to serve and give back to our great state. You have either one or both of those, come on, join our team. We'll do some great things together across North Carolina. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question.
Bristow Smith.
First, I want to echo Superintendent Jackson's remarks that this is so exciting. It's also so timely, and it's also so aligned with the vision that we're having for a more equitable approach to serving the whole child in North Carolina. I wanted to ask if you guys could speak to some degree about metrics for how you'll measure the impact of the North Carolina Education Corps, and sort of what the outcomes are that you hope to be able to achieve over what time period.
I'm going to turn that over to John Paul because he's actually put some significant thought into that, and it's actually something that he's blended into the application process as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great question. We're viewing the program right now as there's sort of two prongs to it. One is immediate relief, and the second is some renewal. And in both cases, we want to align what the Ed Corps members are doing based on the needs of the districts, and also with the whole child and equity resolution goals that the State Board of Education is pursuing. In terms of Ed Corps members themselves, I think they can serve two functions. One is a direct service function, so that would be the mentor, the tutor type function, and then the second function would really be, in some ways, providing some strategic staffing capacity, additional capacity to school districts to help think about, okay, while we're providing immediate relief this spring, how can we think together more strategically along the lines of what you just asked about to pursue specific outcomes-oriented goals? That'll take time. All this work will take time. But our intention is that Ed Corps members can serve sort of two functions this school year and move in the direction that you're talking about. And we'd love to get your input on how to go about that. And it's one thing that we're looking for in the applications that we're sharing with the districts over the next couple of weeks, which is, how could they imagine specific outcomes and Ed Corps members helping to drive towards those outcomes.
Follow up, Chair Davis.
Please.
Just following up there, specific to John Paul, your last remarks, could you foresee a time in which the North Carolina Education Corps might help us to achieve greater capacity to serve the mental health challenges that so many of our North Carolina students are facing? We saw yesterday some data from Dr. Essick and her team about the significant increase in student sense of disconnectedness and suicidal ideation and other negative mental health issues. And that data was pre-COVID. So I wonder if you could see a time in which social workers, school psychologists, school nurses, those kinds of support people might be dovetailed in with the North Carolina Education Corps.
Personally, I believe so. One thing that we have to be careful about in the immediate future is we want Corps members who are trained in a way that's appropriate for the roles that they're serving. And we can imagine that, we've already talked about, GEAR funds are being used to support Ed Corps members this year. There's the $20 million that can help to contribute to paying for Ed Corps members. There's another $40 million that goes to counselors and nurses. We could absolutely imagine more Ed Corps members helping to contribute to sort of collective impact efforts. We want to think about how those pieces, which really contribute to a whole child approach, kind of fit together. And we hope to carve out space this spring to have conversations like the one that you're sort of starting right now around what does this actually look like? How do we approach it? But the short answer to your question is absolutely, I could imagine that future, and we should co-create it together.
If I may, Mr. Ford.
Mr. Ford.
Yes. So this whole prospect, of course, sounds very exciting. In the mission to eliminate gaps, it's gonna, the gaps aren't gonna close on themselves. I like to say that we have to fill those gaps with something. And so this sounds like such an intervention. With that, I did have a question that kind of dovetails on the professional development and training piece. Have you entertained the idea of an induction process that acclimates the Corps members to The context that they're in. I say that because in the same way that you've probably heard over the last several days, the notion of making sure that educators have cultural competence, that they demonstrate emotional intelligence. Going into any community, there's just a need to understand, much like we got today, like the history of that community, the complex social and political dynamics that are at play. And so I just wanted to know how you were thinking about that, or if you were thinking about that as part of the induction process for core members.
Absolutely are. Yeah, there's sort of two parts to the training that we're putting together. One is standardized training, which incorporates the type of cultural competence training as well as social and emotional learning training that you're speaking to right now. And then the second part of the training is a little bit more specialized. In regards to the training too, we will provide initial training before people begin their service term, and then we'll also provide ongoing training. And so there will be opportunities for ongoing training for service members as they're doing service. The training is meant to make sure that everyone does have a good understanding of the communities that they're serving in. I think, one thing that we want to be thinking about is even as we recruit core members, we are screening for folks who have an approach where they're thinking about those types of things. Some of the core members may even be from the districts that they're serving in. I think in some ways that may even be ideal in some cases. We're also asking the superintendents in the district application, could you share a little bit about important cultural or historic sites within your district so that we have that information and we can package that into training. I was a member I went through Leadership North Carolina, and Leadership North Carolina, I think during the first session they do a history of North Carolina. We will be packaging that type of information into the training program. And if you have ideas for either categories that we should bake in, or even ideas for great speakers and trainers, we could talk offline to include that in our training where appropriate.
I certainly do. Thank you.
Just one other thing that we want to emphasize, and that is that John Paul has developed a really nice application process. It's thoughtful, it's comprehensive, this application process for the district, and embedded in that material are also questions about the kind of supervisory support these folks will have in the district, and the measures that'll be taken in this context, in this climate of pandemic, the measures that'll be taken to help ensure the safety and health of these folks we deploy.
Other questions, comments? Hearing none, we again add our thanks to you, Smith and Dr. Ward, for your work on this exciting venture. Certainly this is a key part of our response to COVID-19, but we also are confident that this will become an enduring part of our education system throughout the foreseeable future. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Glad to be working with you.
Our pleasure. Good to be back.
We won't let you go. All right. So, board members, this concludes our new business items. We'll now proceed to voting on any item requiring action from your committee reports. Thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including the respective consent items, which are primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in the prior month. Also, the board members have seen these consent items for at least a week. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any items from consent action or action on first reading agendas.
Mr. Chair, this is Dan Forrest. Could we just separate out the K-5 opening vote from the rest of them, please?
Lieutenant Governor, are you referring to the approval of the Strong Schools North Carolina Public Health Toolkit?
The discussion related to getting K-5 schools opened up, allowing certain districts to do that?
Well, yes, that's an aspect of the tool, the guidance, the toolkit provides guidance, take that step. Yes, we can separate that.
Great. Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none. I receive a motion to approve the following: September 2nd and 3rd, 2020 meeting minutes, the September 16th, 2020 meeting minutes, and EICS 1 through 5, SLA 1 through 4, and 11 through 13, BizOp 1 through 6, and ESNP 1 through 4. Motion by Mr. Keenan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hall. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll, captain the vote? Excuse me, Mr. Duncan.
I think you said EICS 1 through 5, and I think EICS 2 and 3. I may be mistaken, I might have, but I think they were discussion items, not voting.
We'll go back and review our agenda. The EICS 1 was an action on first reading, correct? 2 and 3 are discussion items. So I'll modify the motion to be EICS 1 and 4 through 5. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers? Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. Next, seek a motion for approval of the Strong Schools North Carolina Public Health Toolkit K through 12, which includes further revisions as presented in today's meeting. Motion to that effect? Motion by Mr. Keenan. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, before we get a second, I would like to offer up an amendment to the motion, if I may.
Okay.
I would like to amend this to include all grades, all school districts, and charter schools, not just K-12, and have the board and DPI work with DHHS to give us the guidance to do that.
Okay. Now, Governor, let me first get a second on the motion that's on the floor, and then I'll come back to you for a substitute motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Is there a second to the main motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Now we're looking for discussion on the main motion, and I'll turn to you, Lieutenant Governor.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to make a amendment to this motion to include all grades, all school districts, all charter schools as well, and have the state board work with DHHS and DPI work with DHHS to come up with the guidelines to get all of those schools open as well, not just K-5.
This is Mrs. White. May I make a comment? This is Mrs. White. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. White.
Okay, thank you. I'll offer this to the Lieutenant Governor's friendly amendment. And the reason for my second is because of the data and metrics represented today in the graphs presented during the report from DHHS. And as I advocated for way back in March of this year, there's a wide variety of COVID impact across our state. There are many PSUs who have not had a large degree of COVID cases within their county. And I would love to see those individual PSUs, which are, again, in partnership with DHHS, who are ready to reopen, to offer that opportunity to all students K-12.
So a question on the substitute motion is the motion to extend the plan A.
I'm sorry, we're getting a lot of feedback here. I couldn't understand what you just said.
Okay. Give Dr. Townsend Smith a moment to work on feedback. Okay. So the clarifying question is the substitute motion to extend the guidance as presented today to all schools, including middle and high school, or is the guidance, or is the motion to go beyond guidance and to allow all schools to go into Plan A?
The motion is to allow all schools to go into Plan A.
Mr. Duncan.
Lieutenant Governor, as I'm thinking about just procedurally, that seems to be, rather than a substitute motion, that seems to be a separate motion. The immediate motion would be toolkit for grades K through 5. It would be a substitute motion, I suppose, if we're going K through 12, although I don't think it'd be the same toolkit necessarily. I don't know, I'm not qualified enough to know.
Mr. Chair, Superintendent Johnson,
Superintendent, Mr. Duncan has the floor.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know. I thought he was done.
I'll come to you.
But I appreciate the motion you're trying to make. It seems to me it comes across, I believe that's a separate motion from the motion suspended.
Superintendent Johnson?
Well, I would like to, Mr. Duncan, Mr. Chair, this is Lieutenant Governor. I would like to amend the motion to include all grades, all schools, including charter schools. So I would like to amend it to include that, please.
So Lieutenant Governor, in clarifying, so your motion is to extend the guidance to those schools, the high school and middle schools.
That's correct.
Superintendent Johnson, you have a comment?
Yes, I didn't know if some of the confusion was caused. I don't know what the motion was that was read earlier this morning. I don't know if it's on eBoard. There was a motion that you read citing some general statutes. I think probably it's just harder. We're not meeting in person. It's just probably hard to keep track of all the motions. I don't know if that's been posted on eBoard and that's the motion here. But I think there's some confusion on what the motion is and what can be amended. I understand what the discussion is, but I think we need to see if you have that motion posted, what the motion on the floor is, or is it just signaling approval of DHHS's guidance, or is there another more substantive motion?
Yeah, thank you for that clarifying question, Superintendent Johnson. So posted on eBoard and to be available on your screen is the recommendation that is the motion, the main motion before us today. And the Lieutenant Governor's substitute motion would amend this to extend the guidance to middle schools and high schools. For Plan A.
Okay, I believe I understand now that I'm reading it. Thank you for putting that up, and so I understand the motions. Thank you.
So before any comments or questions first on the substitute motion?
have a question, Chair Davis.
Yes, Ms. Camden.
Do we have the authority to do this? Or does that authority rest with the governor's office or DHHS? I mean,
Well, I believe before we even get to authority, there's a somewhat more pragmatic issue, and that is that the health guidance that I suspect we would get from our partners in DHHS for middle and high school students might be fundamentally different or have some degree of difference than the guidance given to students in grades K through 5. That's based on the discussions with DHHS in terms of why they recommended moving forward only with grades K through 5 into Plan A and not moving into middle and high school. So to the Lieutenant Governor's point, perhaps we should engage in discussions with DHHS over what the guidance for middle and high school students would look like when we get to that point of opening our schools for Plan A for middle and high school. But you're correct. The governor has only authorized kindergarten and through 5th grades for going into Plan A at this time.
Mr. Chair, it's Mark Johnson again.
Yeah, Superintendent.
I think that's where there's probably some confusion because the motion says that the State Board of Education is approving as official guidance. So that does make it seem like the state board, as the constitutional authority over schools, is saying this is the guidance for schools. And is there anyone that can explain what the current legal guidance is? Because we're not operating under an executive order in Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. That came from the governor's office, but I don't think there's an executive order for those plans.
Mr. Zyko, are you on?
Mr.
Yes,
Zyko?
yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Could you share with us the legal guidance around this motion?
Well, first, let me advise you that you're always able to take my legal advice in closed session. But if you want to take it in open session, the purpose of the motion was for the board to endorse the guidance about the medical and health advice for opening schools. The advice has in it notations to the governor's action on September 17th to include the Plan A option. That's within the governor's authority under his executive power, the executive orders, whether open schools or not. How the schools are open and how they operate once they're open would be within the board's jurisdiction.
Mr. Chair, this is Lieutenant Governor, if I may.
Yes, Lieutenant Governor.
What was just mentioned by Mr. Zyko was the word endorse and not approve. We've been using the word approve here as if the governor has authority over the State Board of Education and administering education statewide to our public schools. That falls on this State Board of Education. That is our duty. In fact, we have, in other instances, numerous times taken other elected officials to court when they've tried to usurp our constitutional authority. And we have schools across the state that want to be able to open safely now. There are other districts that across the state that want to be open in some capacity. And why would we as a board deny any school district this ability? The Session Law 2020-49 says that we need DPI, DHHS, and the state board to agree on these things. So the amendment that I'm proposing is to allow for all grades in all districts and public charter schools, not just K-5, the ability to reopen. So I don't think that's very confusing here. This is the state board's job. This is guidance by the governor's office, but we're in charge of education statewide. And we know all these secondary issues that are going on with these students by not being in school. We need to get them back in school, and that's what this motion's about.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. That does clarify that substitute motion. The agenda item before us and the main motion before us does not deal with whether schools are open or closed. It deals with approving the health guidance and is limited in that scope. The point you're raising is worthy of debate, but is beyond the scope of this particular agenda item, which is either to approve this guidance as revised today or not approve the guidance today. So I think your point is well taken, worthy of debate, but it's outside the scope of this agenda item.
Well, then, Mr. Chair, if I may, just say if it's worthy of debate, this is what the board should be doing. We should be debating it. We shouldn't be looking to other people to make determinations for the State Board of Education of how we get our kids back in schools. We should work with those groups, but this is the job of the board. With that, then I will, if it's out of order, Mr. Chair, I will withdraw it, but my comments are still valid. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. So that returns us back to the main motion. Any discussion on the main motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yeah.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. That concludes our voting items. I want to thank all board members, staff, and presenters for the work over this three-day planning meeting. We look forward to receiving an update from the department at our November meeting on proposed legislative priorities. Moreover, I want to thank each of you for your engagement at this planning and work session. We have together created a guide that sets the priorities for our state. As we look to the numerous transitions over the next several months, we'll continue to ground ourselves in this work that we've completed during this planning session and together move forward in partnership, knowing that we will achieve the established goals and objectives, paramount of which is to take Ms. Clemens' charge to us of Together We Can and turn it into Together We Did. So let it be resolved in action. I now ask for a motion to adjourn this October 6th through 8th, 2020 planning meeting. Motion by Mr. Ford, second by Mr. Keenan. Dr. Townsend?
Yes, sir. Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. We are adjourned. Have a good day.